Got it. All right.
We are recording.
Oh, okay. Well, appreciate everybody coming in. I know there's going to be people dropping in here. Today is one of the webinars I like to do as part of Extension. And I work with Dr. Joe Outlaw. He's a Regents professor and co-director of the Agriculture and Food Policy Center at Texas A&M. Unfortunately, Joe does not get paid as much at $95 million a year like the football coach, but he almost close.
Close,
But
right.
close. I worked with Joe a lot, and Joe and I were made fellows of the Western Ag Econ Association a few years ago. We work a lot with them. A&M, the Ag and Food Policy Center, does a lot of work with the USDA and with federal government when any kind of changes going on, farm policy changes. And of course, when you come out here to the West, foreign policy, USDA foreign policy have some impacts, but public lands has major. So we do a lot. We've had representative we call ranches in Elko, Nevada, and we just finished updating in Lincoln County. So these two are in our space. So they're part of our research group. So done a lot with them, and they got real good data. In fact, I just finished something on agricultural supply chains we may want to look at a little later also. Today is, with everything like in the federal government, it's always changes, and some are tax changes. Often we don't think about how agriculture, or specifically Nevada agriculture, or even public land agriculture, may be impacted by these tax changes. I don't think they passed yet, but Joe can correct me, but there's something called the Sensible Taxation and Equity Promotion Tax Act and the 99% Tax Act. And they've done some analysis of this, of what these changes might mean on the national stage for agriculture, crop producers and livestock, and even, like I said, individual in the West and in public lands such as Nevada. So I'll let Joe start, and everybody be on mute. If you have, at the end of Joe's presentation, if you have any questions, we will have people address these questions to Joe. I'm going to tell you, Joe Bill Payne, our Dean of Agriculture at UNR, is on this also. He used to be at the Amarillo station, part of Texas A&M's. I went to Tech. I'm used to the high plains, throwing dirt in my face. I ever get lonely for Lubbock. So anyway, Joe, go right ahead.
Okay. One of you needs to give me access to share my screen.
Oh, okay. I will do that. Still don't have.
Okay.
All right. Good.
So let me see. Gotta move that over there for a second. That. Okay, are we good to go? If you see it, okay.
Yeah, sure do,
right.
Joe.
So as Tom said, we've been working. We do something called representative farms and ranches. We've been doing it since the early '80s, and we work with real people around the country to make on-paper farms that we then analyze through a simulation model. And the work that we do as for Congress, the Ag and Food Policy Center is a center that a member of Congress from Texas a long time ago, Charlie Stenholm, some of you may know, he came to Texas A&M and asked them to put together a center that could be an unbiased source of information. Because what generally happens, whoever's in charge of USDA, whichever party is in charge of the White House, basically gets USDA to provide them what they want out of there. And the members of Congress, if you're on the other side of the aisle, feel like they aren't getting unbiased information. So we've been doing this work for quite some time. Others in my center, I've known Tom a long time. I was a student worker for this center when I first started at Texas A&M, and now I kind of, I guess I've made it. I don't know if that's a good thing or another thing, but for today's purposes, we were asked. We work off request basis. It keeps us out of hot water because, we didn't just come up with an idea of analyzing something on our own. We get requested to do it, which gives us cover with the people in Washington that came up with these ideas. If so, we that's how we work. We get an official letter from, in this case, it was Senator Bozeman and Ranking Member Thompson asked for this analysis, and they specifically said, here are the here's the draft legislation for the Sensible Taxation and Equity Promotion Act, what we call STEP Act, and here's the draft legislation for the 99.5% Act. I can't recall who the STEP Act was, but I know that Senator Bernie Sanders is the person who introduced the 99.5% Act. So those are two deals, and basically to keep in mind, and I'm gonna say I'm out of order. We already have estate taxes, right? And over time, the exemption on estate taxes, the part you do not have to pay taxes on, has gone up over time, and I have a graph in a little bit. What the 99.5% Act is wanting to do is reduce the amount of exemptions so that people will pay more tax on a greater amount of their assets. What the STEP Act does is eliminate the stepped up basis upon death of which we call a generational transfer. You know, if a husband and wife are in place and the husband passes away, there's no change in the tax because basically they owned it, half of it anyway in most states. But the way that STEP Act does is without that death of the husband, immediately they have a step up in their basis on that year to whatever the value is at that time, reducing the taxes, and they don't even pay capital gains on that either currently. So what STEP Act would do is to do away with that, and people would pay a tax on the difference of what their family bought it for and what it's worth at their death. The descendants would. So two different things, but they're kind of interrelated. As it says here, under current tax law, assets held longer than they're subject to long-term capital gains tax, depending upon income. So they can be as low as 20% or as high as 40-something%. We basically, to do this analysis, you know, when these folks call out of Washington, they say, "Well, once you analyze this," you know, the quick and easy answer for a lazy economist is, if nobody dies, nothing happens, right? So we have to assume a death that is a generational transfer, and the decedents or the children, or however you want to call it, the heirs, would be paying the tax. So in the case of the tax law, we have everything in place, but we're going to be changing the stepping up of the basis and changing the amount of the estate tax exemptions. Get a little bit of history. Some of you probably know this better than I do, but prior to all this stuff being done, the current exemption is 11.18 million for a person, husband and wife, 23 million. So that's a big number, and that was increased over time. George W. Bush is the one that put in place the legislation that basically ratchets this up over time. That is set to expire already in 2025. But what we did was, and at that point, it would revert back to 5.49 million per person, or a little over 10 million for a married couple. Again, what we did is just change the current tax obligations based on whatever legislation we were looking at. The STEP Act, again, proposes eliminates stepped up basis upon death of the owner. It does say in the bill, and this is one of the criticisms I'll get to later, the bill says that it's going to give you $1 million exemption on taxes of capital gains. So we did include that. So if you had a big capital gain, we excluded the first $1 million and then taxed you on the rest. I'll just get to it in a minute. So that's that. And then with the 99.5% Act, again, the big deal here is, and this is the number I want you to keep in mind, it decreases the estate tax further. You know, I already told you in 2025 it's going to go to about 5 point something a piece. Well, this would reduce it to 3.5 million per individual or 7 million for a couple. And it raises the top marginal estate tax rates to closer to 40. That's the biggest change. So if you're analyzing an operation, we have 90, so I'm going to get to it in a minute. We have more than 90 of these representative farms across the country that each of those farms represents about 4 to 5 operations, sometimes 6, that come and meet with us every other year, collect the costs, make sure we got the structure of the operation right, then we simulate it. You kind of tell Congress how things are going in ag. But we can also do the tax stuff, and that's what we did here. It is an interesting deal. If here's the schedule of exemptions that have been in place, you can see that it's changed over time and gotten up and up and up. And like I said, in 2025, it's going to go back to about 5 point something. So it would bounce back in 2025, even without this other legislation. So we analyzed that as one option. So here's what we actually did. Scenario 1, current law is in place. The 11 million times 2 for husband and wife. There's no generational transfer, which means basically the husband passed away and the wife gets it. And what would the tax laws look like there? Scenario 2 is current law, but there is a generational transfer, meaning that it's going to be transferred to their children or heirs, however you want to call it, but current law still. So the first two are kind of to give us a base to compare to. Scenario 3 is the STEP Act with generational transfer. So current law on the estate taxes, but STEP Act's put in place. And then 4 is current law on stepped up basis, but the reduction in the estate tax exemption it goes to 3.5. 5 is combine those two together. And so for us, for nerdy economists, we analyze the farms all one way, then we run them again, analyze another way, and that's how we do it. And so we collect all the results. We have farms and ranches all across this country. The ones that I have circled here in red are the ranches. And as Tom said, I never really know. I've been to Elko and I remember the town and I remember meeting with the folks, and I've been to Lincoln County, but I don't remember there being a town there. I remember there being a store.
It's Caliente.
I don't know what. Okay, I never can't remember the town, Tom. But so my team goes out every other year, usually like clockwork. Sometimes something happens and it might be every 2 years, but really we want to get it every other year to kind of get it updated in those operations. So basically, in Nevada, we've got 2 operations raising cattle and 650 mother cows and 550 mother cows. You can see that we've got row crops all around the country and things like that. So, and dairies as well. But I'm going to focus a lot on the ranch stuff because we're talking I think it's really going to be really important. I put this graph in here because a lot of people forget that asset values have gone up over time significantly in this country, whether we're talking about pasture land, crop land, just real estate in general. So the point is, if you bought something for $30 an acre a long time ago, and the first time there is a generational transfer, and now it's worth $1,000 an acre, you're going to be under this stepped up plan. You would be paying taxes on the difference, and so just kind of to think about that. If you don't have very many assets, and that's the next thing to think about. If an operation doesn't have much assets, if they're in the West and they're all public lands and they don't have owned assets, you're not going to get taxed very much under these proposals. So one of the things we had to do, we had to send an email to all the participants. So on the 90 whatever farms we have, 90, let's just say it's 94. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's on a slide here in a minute. But each of those has about 4 to 6 producers. So we have about 600 people that we will ask questions of when we do things for Congress. And what we asked them was, of the assets that you personally own, when did you get it? How long have you had it? So the first set of columns over here is any land that you had less than 5 years. And so on the ranches, about 13% had of the land was they'd owned less than 13 years. So we were trying to come up with kind of an age of, to try to make this more realistic, because if you could, as economists, we could have assumed these problems away, or we could assume it all on them. And so when we get criticism in Washington, they'll say, well, you made this look as bad as you could. And my answer is no, I didn't. If I wanted to make this look bad, I would assume that all of it was over 30 years of age, and I would use land values, and I'd scale it back. What they gave us now, scale it back, and you'd be paying taxes on the difference on that. What we did find out, though, in real life was that 2 things that are important here. We send those guys emails, guys and gals emails, a couple of times a year asking them questions. And our response rate on that is not usually very good. It's usually about 10 to 15, sometimes 20% if they're really worried about this particular problem we're asking them about. Like, how would this affect you and that sort of thing. The response rate on this particular question was over 50% of the 600 real farmers around this country. Tom, I don't think, do you get that kind of survey response other than casinos?
Never.
So again, it's not statistically valid because it's not the whole sample. It's the sample of everybody we work with, 50% of them. But you can see that most of them said, we have a significant portion of our land that is, we've had ownership for 30 years or more. And so what we did was we took the current value, we backed it down to 30 years, and they would say for the ranches, 30% of their land, current land holdings was more than 30 years, they've owned it more than 30 years. And so we have, when you go to do step basis on that, it really matters. I think it brings a lot more realism to do these things this way, and that's why we did it that way. So here's the results for all the farms overall. We ran 94 farms, and under the scenario 1, nobody died, no change, no big deal, nothing happened. Under scenario 2, somebody died under current policy, it would only affect 2 out of the 94, roughly 2%. And the Secretary of Agriculture, I know this is being recorded, so I'm going to tone down my stuff here a little bit. But the Secretary came out pretty early on and said, actually came out of the White House, that only 2% of the farmers in the United States were going to be impacted by these things. And you can say, why are these important? And then maybe I missed the boat. I didn't say this earlier. These 2 pieces of legislation are in the Build Back Better plan because they are going to provide offsets for the additional spending. So this was money raised through higher taxes, basically, tax law changes, and they need that in there to pay for that, what was going to be $3 trillion, and now it looks like it might be less. But so obviously that's why this was important. This is why the congressman and the senator asked us to analyze it, and we did. So they came out with 2% of all U.S. farmers would be impacted. And we came up with a little bit different answers than that. So when you look at the results, average liability across all 90, 2 of them that were impacted, or actually the 2 that were impacted, sorry, was 370,000. Obviously, that's the line I'm going to be referring to the most. So if you go to scenario 3, the STEP Act deal affects almost all the farms, 98% of them. And because of the reason, I showed you that we had some land that was older, and so it would impact farms more. And across all the farms, the average liability due to the STEP Act doing away with stepped up basis was $726,000. Now you can say, well, is that a $50 million ranch, or is that a $50 million crop farm, or is that a $10 million? It's across all different sizes, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. Scenario 4, the 99.5% Act, basically it's the one that reduces the exemption on estate taxes. And again, if we're working with farms that don't have over 3.5 times 2 people or $7 million worth of assets, they're not, this will not affect them. So we didn't have, but we had 44% of our farms affected, but the ones that were affected to the tune of about $2.1 million. When you put those two together, it kind of averages down the effect, because only 44% had this big 2 million, and 98% had this number. So it ended up being over across, if you add them both together, about a 1.4 difference in their tax liability. And so that's kind of the broad answers, and that's what we kind of focused on. You know, I've been doing this a long time, and I don't go out of my way to poke the bear on these things. We write the reports really bland. We say, here's what it says, here's what we analyzed, we were asked to do it. And Congress and the politicians can do what they want to, but here's the results. And the senator and the ranking member of the House basically ran with it pretty high, got a lot of attention. The White House actually made comments on this report saying that we overstated. And so then people in Congress asked the secretary to have USDA analyze it, and they came back again with 2% of the farms, and where we had 98% and 2% and 44%, they had 2%. And everyone, I get the press calls and ask me this stuff all the time, and the answer is, we're working with commercial farms, people that this is their livelihood. They analyzed it using the ARMS database, which includes anybody who sells ag production worth more than $1,000 in any one year. So if, for example, I'm in their database as a farmer, it wouldn't affect me at this point. None of these changes would affect me, which means basically I don't have over $7 million worth of land. So that's kind of where we get the different answers. And man, they've attacked our report, saying that we made some assumptions that was too restrictive and things like that. And frankly, that's just not the case. The difference is we work with commercial farms. Congress wants to know what their policy changes are doing to commercial farmers, not part-time farmers, university professors that have a few cows on the side, that sort of thing. And so when you look at it, if you look at the USDA report, it very much mimics our results for full-time farmers.
Joe,
And
can I ask a
so,
question?
yeah.
Joe, can I ask a question? Kelly and some of the others, this right here, what Joe has is our 2 representative farms. I know Kelly works, her husband's in ranching, and she works at FSA. Do those figures look okay to you? That's what we did with when we went and we talked to people. This is what it's not your farm, it's what you think. I represented farm in Elko. And of course, in Southern Nevada, I always say below Highway 50, it's almost 100% on public lands, and north of 50 is like 50-50. So this is what we kind of use as our basis to do any kind of analysis.
So that's the point, you know. Obviously, the farm that has almost all public land won't be impacted that greatly by the tax problem, because they don't have enough assets that they own. If there was a death and those types of assumptions. The larger, the Elko farm, I can tell you right now, with the 8,000 acres of owned pasture land, one of them is affected and one of them's not, and it's pretty clear. I made them put this chart together purposefully because I wanted to tell you why the differences are. It has everything to do with how much owned assets there are. And if somebody says, boy, this doesn't seem right, then we'll have to go back to the 4 to 5 producers that meet with us and go, hey, look, we got smart people at University of Nevada, Reno that don't think that this is the way this works. But generally, the farmers, again, as Tom said, we aren't asking them their operation. We're saying, if we want to come represent the way it's done in this part of Nevada, Lincoln County, Nevada, about how much would a farmer own or a rancher own versus lease, and then public lands and all that. So we spend a lot of time. It takes about 4 hours to put these together the first time, and then the updates go faster, but it takes a while to get the structure and everything right. But this is the structure we used on the Nevada ranches. And then here's their real estate values that we pulled. And
Joe, are you
So-
seeing Kelly's comments by any
I
chance?
haven't looked yet.
Well, okay. Like I said, with FSA, she said that our speaker's not working, but as we always see, land values have been increasing significantly over the past year. So I think we'll see more and more people impacted.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, you know, we caught all kinds of heat out of Washington for this report, but frankly, I think we're a little bit subdued compared to what I think is actually going to happen, because I think it's going to really impact agriculture, and our results show that. But it could be even worse if you're having to try to pay for it, because we didn't really show the train wreck of trying to pay these taxes. And I'll talk about that a little bit in just a second. But here's the deal. I already pinpointed that the 99.5% Act was focused on about 7 million in assets. So if your total asset value is below 7 million, that act wasn't going to have any impact on you. But the Elko farm ranch, it was over, so it would be an impact.
So Joe, there's going to be a differential impact in northern Nevada versus southern Nevada.
Yes, absolutely. And so just to kind of highlight it, and here's the results for all the ranches. And so the STEP Act, which is the one that talks about, hey, you bought it for $50 an acre, now it's worth $5,000 an acre because university professors are wanting to build summer homes, whatever. That's what happens here, I can tell you. So the STEP Act actually impacts, just like for across all the rest of the operations we deal with, it affected both of these. There would be a tax liability on both of them. $1.8 million for Elko and $386,000 for the one in Lincoln County. When you look at the 99.5% Act, obviously, just like I said, if you don't have over 7 million in assets, you weren't really going to be taxed. It really is 8 because they give you an exemption of another extra million. That exemption is on STEP. So $2 million would be, say that it's a straight one husband and wife. The husband passed away a long time ago. The wife passes away now. The children are going to get it. This operation would have, the Elko operation would have a $3 million tax liability. The Lincoln County would have a $386,000 tax liability. And that doesn't really say how is their ability to pay. Well, this is the part that if people think I'm a kind of a not a nice person in Washington, it's because I do stuff like this. I said, well, let's look at how much income they've had over the last few years and projected income and average it and say, how many years of that income would it take to pay that tax debt? So for the Elko operation to pay that STEP Act tax debt, it would take 18.9 years of about $100,000 a year to pay for that. The Lincoln County would take 4.6 years. So why did I say that? Well, because in the legislation itself, it said that they would the government will allow them to make payments on their debt. They didn't have to pay it off at once. And we know in real life terms, a lot of people would go to the bank and borrow it and just it would basically be a new land note, essentially, to do that. But if you were going to try to pay it out of current activities, it would take the total tax liability on the Elko farm would be about 30 years of $100,000 a year. income would have to go towards it. So when the legislators got me on their press conference and made me talk about this report, I said that essentially, whether you agree with anything that we did or not, it's going to put a burden, a financial burden on these operations. It cannot help but do that. And anything you could do to lessen the financial burden would be a positive for agriculture. I didn't say they couldn't afford it, which many of them can't, but I didn't say any of that. This is one of those things that if I wanted to show you the press clippings of what the administration has been saying, it's been one of those where we had people's attention. And also we got told by some think tanks that are leaning the way the administration leans, that they discuss in those two pieces of legislation that they were going to exempt agriculture. So if it didn't detail how they were going to exempt agriculture, we couldn't analyze it, right? So we just said it. We didn't, anything they do to do that, we didn't analyze that. We analyzed what would be the implications if these two pieces of legislation were put in place. And since that time, they have come up with, well, we're going to give an exemption towards agriculture, and there's no details, so we still couldn't analyze if we wanted to. But what they've said was, as long as it stays in agriculture, you wouldn't pay the tax, which begs another question of, like my land that I have, if I give it to my sons, they are neither one going to be doing anything in agriculture. So they would have to pay the tax that I had accrued at this point in time when I inherited it. I didn't have to pay it, but it's a tax liability on that land that's going to be passed to my heirs. I've told people all over the United States that ask me about this, is that somebody from agriculture, if that land leaves, and eventually it will, somebody's paying that tax, and it will change the value of it, and it will change the outlook for it, because there are some lenders that think that an impending tax liability should be carried on the books.
Joe, could I ask a question?
Yep.
Any difference between, like, you're a sole proprietor versus a corporate farm or ranch?
There is a little bit of stuff, but basically all of our farms are treated as sole proprietors. So I can't remember the actual legislation language, how it was going to treat it, but it's basically, it was going to work it the same way. The only thing that really gets a little screwy, and I will not speak to it because I don't remember, is trusts, and that's the one that gets a little bit screwy. But as you can see, I'm trying to tell you that we didn't do what they're saying they were going to exempt agriculture. This kind of blew up in a lot of people's face, and I can tell you that the stepped up basis has been taken out of the BBB, the Build Back Better stuff that's in there right now. That doesn't mean it's going to stay out, but it's out right now. But the lower estate tax exemptions is in there still, and that's kind of where we're at. So if anybody has a question for me, I'd be glad to try to answer it. But some of this stuff is pretty nitty gritty. I had to get tax accountants to sit with this and make sure that we were doing all this appropriately, because obviously we know policy, we don't know the tax law forward and backward, but we think we've done a very good job of representing what it would mean to these operations.
I ask any questions from people. I know Kelly, if you can type in something. Bill, you got any questions?
No, I'm just kind of horrified by what I'm hearing. And I guess, Joe, you were saying overall the rationale for this was to pay for the Build Back Better program that after all was going to be free. And if you said it might get an exemption for agriculture, but just for small family businesses too, who wouldn't be exempt, this has got to be just as devastating, right?
Yes. Yes.
I'm just, I'm blown away by this.
It's one of those, I must admit, we don't do as much as we should, but these intergenerational transfers are very tricky. There's a lot of legal stuff. And yes, it's, that's why I wanted to do this, kind of bring on a different view. I mean, public lands are different,
Yeah.
as you saw with the north and south.
But
But
they're
even,
they're under their own pressures.
yeah, under pressures and
They're under their own pressures to put, public lands farming out of business. I'm serving as an expert witness on this suit against Western Range Association,
Mhm.
which brings in H2A herders. And the suit is trying to claim that since they're on call 24 hours a day, they should be paid 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, retroactively, which would just put everybody out of business. And this is at a time when we already have youth who are exiting agriculture. We can't get the best and brightest to come into it. You've seen what's happening with inflation at the grocery store, et cetera. Pressures to anything from eat less meat and get ranching off public lands. It's just breathtaking. The policies that the administration are taking right now, and I appreciate the lengths to which Joe has gone to try to be above the fray and apolitical. But policies have impacts; they have consequences, and my God, this just really seems like a policy ran amok.
Save that for me.
I would say that's where we want to look at the income pre and post tax. Sometimes we want to look. Now I know with Kelly, with FSA, her and her husband have a public range, but even when you inherit ranges, you go through a whole, as opposed to private land, you have to go and there's a whole lot, another array of expenses we do with BLM on AUMs and all that are added expenses to inheritance. But let me go. Bill, you got any other questions you'd like to say or anything?
No.
Just
Oh, no.
okay. Michael, you got anything you'd like to ask? I'm not putting you on the spot, but if you have a question or something. Got you muted.
Yeah, no, I mean, great presentation. I don't really have, I think that I guess my question is, and I kind of, do you know, I mean, people had expectations about this tax policy being in place. Do you know what the balance sheet of these ranches are? Presumably if this was always a tax policy and they were having this increase in asset values, they could, they wouldn't be borrowing against their, the value of their property at the same extent. Do you have an idea of, did you talk to them about what their expectations were? They thought when the Bush era kind of estate tax rules were going to expire, were people preparing for that?
Well,
did you get anything about expectations, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we sent the email that said, hey, we're studying this is what we had to describe a little bit, because some of them really follow everything out of Washington and some don't. So we described it a little bit, and that's why we got the massive response we got. But we actually asked one other question that said, what would you do to pay that liability? And I don't know what percentage, but it was a very high percent said they were going to have to liquidate some of their assets to pay that, because they didn't have the cash, they didn't have and it just hurt their feelings to borrow more money to go into debt to pay for something they've already paid. Their family, in their mind, their family had already paid for. So the answer is the balance sheet for most of agriculture out there on the crop side is very strong right now. On the livestock side, it's hit and miss, but it's never that strong because they don't have that. A good year in the cow-calf business isn't that much money. I mean, it's really, and it's not like a good year in the crop business and 10,000 acres of land, you're going to be making a fortune. So the livestock side is at a weaker position. Now on the dairy side, those dairies make when they make money, they make a fortune. Then the next year they're going to lose a lot of money, but they were more in position to be able to pay for it as well. The big thing for us, and it's all nuance, and maybe you think, well, this is a guy trying to weasel out of being such a jerk about things, but the big thing for us is, and I tell people in Washington this all the time, it isn't our place to say whether this is a good policy or not. That's for you. Y'all are elected to do this. It's our place to tell you, if you want to lessen the burden on producers, you do need to think about some exemptions, because the burden's going to be pretty high. And that's really the point for us. Now, people don't like it when you attack their policies. This is what they said we did. We attacked their policies. No, we just did our job. But and to your point, it has everything to do with trying to make sure people understand this isn't $20,000 a tax. This is millions of dollars of tax, depending upon how big your operation is. And it gets substantial. And so I would say that the livestock side, specifically cow-calf, is the least equipped to pay for this stuff.
I would say also, Kelly had a very good point. And it's one that we always wrestle with, doing tax laws or having extension taxes, you can see a pale of boredom coming over people's faces. But that these ranchers need to be sophisticated, because all of a sudden they're just hit. They're not preparing themselves. And I think that's something that this is helping, that get your exemptions, or what Michael was saying, if you have a high debt to asset ratio, what can you do given your current finances, instead of just being, unfortunately, they get blindsided because they haven't looked at this. And I think this is the main thing that I think is good about your paper, that start thinking about this, guys, that how would it impact your asset backs.
That's the take home message when I do actual producer meetings, is that they need, if they don't have an estate plan, they need to do that, because this isn't the time to not have that in place.
Is there talk right now, do you know, of having a cutout for ag, like exempting ag from these changes?
Well, okay, so what they've done right now, instead of doing exemptions, they set the stepped up basis aside, and it isn't in there. But the state tax is in there, and I don't know that there's a cutout for ag at all.
Michael, I was talking to Kelly, because she's with FSA. I think they could be impacted a lot, wouldn't they? These lending agencies that lend out to ranchers in Nevada, all of a sudden people can come in with bad balance sheets and that kind of stuff. Move on. Leanna, you got any questions? Appreciate your questions, Michael. Leanna?
Tom, I'm trying to wrap my mind around it. I was involved in a ranch in Northern Nevada that was purchased at $1.7 million, and we sold it for $5.3 million, and we paid a lot of taxes. But looking at that ranch now and the worth of that ranch, and comparing it to the schedule you're showing me, we could not have paid the taxes. Our taxes were $600,000, and we had 2 lifetime exemptions of $500,000 combined. So I understand what you're talking about, but of course, I'm just a cowgirl that has been involved in something. And so what you're showing me is very scary. If it was the same situation now, we couldn't anyway. And if there had been a death, we were not prepared, and we would have been in trouble, and the children would have been inheriting a huge tax liability. So that's all I have to say is I had boots on, I was in the dirt. I understand what you're talking about. I'm glad I'm out of it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Kelly had another good question. Like Kelly, when she was 12, her and her husband took my first class. I taught at UNR back in the 80s. But our question is, with lenders, she said the lenders would be impacted significantly as tax liens take priority over other liens on property. And I think that's a very good point that needs to be said on this and why it's important. Patty, you have any questions you'd like to ask?
No, Tom, I don't. So thank you.
No problem. Kelly, I think she's just having sound problems. Catherine, you got any questions?
Not really. I don't know much about tax structure, so it's informative. I wonder how it would impact just landowner. Like at one point, why would I don't know much about tax structures, but if you could just transfer the land to your children that are taking it over
In advance of a death, it would really help. But there's still a certain amount you're not going to avoid it completely, but you can gift a certain amount per year. People have been asking me about that. We looked into it. I've forgotten it now, but there's rules where people ask me, and I said, well, you need to be looking at working with your estate planner to figure out how you can get some of this stuff to other people before a death.
Yeah, there are tax strategies. Patty, I see you have a hand up. You have a question or?
Yeah, I do. And it's,
Okay.
I will say I'm with Catherine on the tax implications. And I'm curious though, thinking about the downstream and, if the impacts of this might be more corporations buying up ranches and farms and just taking it away from individual ranchers and farmers. Is that what the downstream projection would look like, or is that not the case?
Yeah, we really didn't address that, but over time, if you held a gun to my head and said, who's buying the land these days, it's the larger operations. And so whether you want to call them corporate or whatever, but they're going to be the larger folks generally is the ones that can pay the most for the money, most for the land. So I would think that would probably be the occurrence in this situation too.
Interesting. Yeah, there's going to be some changes. People will react to the tax law and do different tax strategies. And whoever knows. Bob Potts, he's one of the head economists at the Governor's Office of Economic Development. He's an ag major from Montana State. Bob, you got any questions? Must be at Bozeman.
Well, IFC meetings going on right now.
Okay, all righty. And another one, though, John, you got any questions? John McLean? It's kind of like my classes. But anyway, we'll end this. And Joe, appreciate the information. It's like an ongoing process. As you can see what's going on in Washington, D.C. every day, we come up with a new, like Everett Dirksen say $1 here, $1 million, $1 trillion here, and $20 trillion there. And I'm sure there's going to be some of the questions and impacts and that with agriculture, not only is production decisions important and maybe marketing, but also intergenerational decisions on taxes are important also. So I do want to appreciate your time, Joe, and we'll talk to you later. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank y'all. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, Bob, I think you can turn it off.
Thanks. Great presentation,
Yeah.
Joe.